Hey everybody, I'm Greg Soul, and this is Why Am I, a podcast where I talk to interesting people and try and trace a path to where they find themselves today. My guest this go-around is Steve Davis. So Steve is likely best known as a Sidemount diver, which is the scuba configuration for cave divers. He shares some harrowing stories about what it means to keep your cool while in deep underwater caves, and spoiler alert, staying calm means staying alive. But more than that, he's a lifelong learner who is constantly challenging himself to learn something new from anyone willing to teach him. He's also a teacher, which seems to go hand in hand with constant learning. And at any rate, I hope you enjoy this chat with Steve. Steve, thank you for joining me on the Why Am I podcast today.
Great to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah, for sure, man. So I've recently been on a kick of looking for people who have interest in occupations that are, I'm not going to say bizarre, but bizarre from what is considered my daily, my normal. And that is what led me to you. I kind of happened in a roundabout way, sort of stumbled on something that, honestly, I'm going to say, has woken me up from many dreams of like maybe terror, the
Yes.
kind of situations that you put yourself into for entertainment, for fun. So I'll let you let the cat out of the bag there. But Steve, with all this in mind, like as interesting as your background is, I'm curious how you see yourself. And with that in mind, I'm going to say, who are you, Steve?
Wow, what a question. How do I see myself? Um, I guess I'm a mature guy, let's call it, and let's be kind to myself now and say that I've lived a life where I've had multiple careers, all of which have been relatively successful. But at the same time, I have many times remodeled myself and re-envisioned what it is that I am. So that the answer to this question would have been quite different 10 to 15 years ago and 10 to 15 years before that. So what am I now? I'm a guy who has found a way to be doing exactly the things that he wants to do, and at the same time make a reasonable income from it. So, I think you were alluding before to my cave diving exploits. So, I decided quite some time ago that I wanted to become a really good diver. I'd loved scuba diving my whole life. So I built my way up from a PADI open water diver all the way to being what now an advanced cave diver and an advanced rebreather cave diver as well. So not that I'm anything, on the world stage, there's many divers doing more interesting things than I do, but I do this kind of for my leisure time, for my pleasure, if you like. And a lot of people sort of, I guess, find cave diving quite a scary thought or prospect. But I liken it to being a fighter pilot or something like that, where someone comes up and said, "Oh, look, I could never fly an F-35," and yeah, i.e., I could never cave dive. And that's absolutely true. You can't cave dive. You have to be a diver first, and then secondly, you have to dive for many years and build experience and comfort level and confidence. And then you need to do the training, and then you need to build more experience. And then one day you find yourself squeezing through a restriction to find your way in this amazing room full of stalactites and stalagmites that, probably more people have been on the moon that have been able to see this place. So you do build yourself up. And again, think of mountain climbing. You're not going to climb Everest on your very first climb. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a lot of training. So that's kind of the cave diving side, and that's diving is one part of what I do. I also teach side mount diving, which is the equipment configuration for cave diving. And that's my thing in terms of one section of my life. The other thing I do is I have a podcast as well on cave diving and side mount diving. And that's an absolute pleasure for me. I don't know how you find your experience as a host, but I get to meet really, really interesting people, some of the world's best divers, and I get to ask them questions about what they do, how they got to where they were, the techniques they use. I find out a bit about them as people. And that's just been an awesome experience. And the reason the podcast came about was I I live in the north of New Zealand. The diving here is phenomenal, but there's not a lot of caves in this region, so I have to travel to cave dive. And I felt like there was a little bit of a gap myself in my diving. I felt like I wanted more. And the podcast, I've been doing it since 2018 now, so quite a while. And I just kind of felt that that was my opportunity to be more involved in diving than I was actually able to be. So the podcast is very niche, not very big, no Joe Rogan, that's for sure. Having said that, I love it and it gets great feedback. So that's another part of that. And that's kind of, if I draw a circle around that, that's kind of my diving life is the podcast. I also have a YouTube channel, which I'm working pretty hard on. There's sort of 250 videos of cave diving and diving in open water off boats and sea caves, and a lot of diving in New Zealand on there if anyone is interested in what happens down here. And then the other side is kind of a business side. I don't know if we're going to go way back into my early career, but the reason I was in the States is I ran a software company in Silicon Valley I ran it for 10 years, but I lived in Silicon Valley for 5 years. And when that finished, it's a classic venture capital story. If you've ever seen the TV comedy series Silicon Valley, the explosion of our company was pretty similar to what happened in that TV series. It's actually really funny how it was comedy and yet it was so close to what happened to us. So I think in my mid 50s, then basically the CEO got fired by the venture capitalists, and I was his right hand guy. And the net result of that was I ended up going with him, which I was pretty happy about. I didn't really like what had happened. So I got an opportunity to think about what I wanted to do, and that's when I decided to seriously start diving. But when we came back to New Zealand, I wanted a business as well. I've been a business guy my whole life, and we arrived at Cooper's Beach, and where I live in the far north, beautiful beach town, and there wasn't a coffee shop here. And coffee is so critical to New Zealand culture. We do espresso coffee here. We don't do drip, so you can't buy a drip coffee here. It's all espresso based, and if it was just a tragedy that there wasn't a shop here, and we kind of thought, wow, we know how this. My wife and we know how to do this. I think I have a master's degree in business as well, so it was kind of starting new businesses is relatively easy for me in terms of the nuts and bolts of what you need to do. So we started this shipping container coffee shop, which has become bizarrely successful. And it just, we pump my team are down there right now. It's sort of 8:23 in the morning, and there'll be literally tens of people coming through every 10 minutes. But buying espresso coffee on their way to work or coming to hang out in our little outdoor area there. So that's been a real pleasure for me as well. And it's kind of another part of my persona. I'm relatively outgoing, and so I kind of consider my role at the shop to kind of fawn around and talk to the customers and make everyone feel good and joke around with them. And funny enough, I learnt this in San Jose as well. I went to a restaurant there, Pizza Antica. There was this most amazing young woman there who was the maitre d', and she did this. This was her thing. She would just walk around. She was like a amazing, like a force of nature. And she would just smile. She was beautiful, but she just smile, make everyone feel great, sit down, talk to you, and just manage the whole experience. A little bit like you were as the waiter, but she just was on top of that. And I sort of learned from that, this is how hospitality should be done. And so we've built a lot of that into our coffee shop. And I think it's a part of the reason that we're successful. So we do a lot of that, a lot of we get to know our customers. They're our friends in many cases now as well. And it's just a really good experience. So, but with Steve Davis, he's a guy that runs these companies. He does pretty much what he wants to do when he wants to do it. Obviously everyone has commitments. Lives in a beautiful beach town in the north of New Zealand. North is warmer in the southern hemisphere, so this is in my mind, the better part of the country to be in. Although the South Island is amazing, but good diving here, so I get to dive when I feel like it as well. And I travel a little bit now for diving normally, usually one or two, maybe three trips a year overseas to Australia for cave diving. And then I try when I can to break away to the Northern Hemisphere, Europe and the States, Mexico and so on when it's possible. So I've kind of got myself into this yeah, my wife and I are both very happy with our situation here now. And it's I wonder if I call it semi-retirement. Maybe it's semi-retirement, but yeah, it's cool.
Semi-retired. So first, I'm going to tell you, I have taken more notes on your "Who are you" than I have ever taken on anyone before. I have almost a page. So we're going to be here about a week. I hope you have time, Steve. I hope you
No
have
problem. No
some
problem.
coffee off
Let's dig in.
camera for sure. But yeah, it's such a plethora of things. Like it was something I wrote down as Renaissance man. This is essentially you've done
Yeah.
everything. The fact that you've been successful. I'm assuming you've been successful through failure as well, right? Like not everything works the first time, but you.
Oh man. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's if we go back to my early, I'm kind of very shaped by I spent 14 years in the New Zealand Navy, so my military career kind of shaped me to a large degree. And by that I mean I learned the value of discipline. I learned the value of hard work. I learned fitness then as well, which is a big part of my life. I didn't include that earlier, but I don't mind telling my age. I'm 62, and I work out like 4 to 5 days a week. I did a high rocks race in Auckland early February, so that's a big part of me, and it's a big part of my persona in terms of, I think it's my superpower now. The fact that I am still fit and strong at this age, and I don't. Obviously, you can feel it, but it's big, and I learned that in the Navy big time. The people I hung with, at least, not everyone was fit there, but the people I hung with were, and we'd work out and train, and we'd do triathlons, and we just figure out what we could do. It was always kind of fitness oriented. So I learned that from the military, and then when I left, you always have this period where you're not sure what you're going to do. And I was an engineer, a mechanical engineer, so I was kind of a steam plant guy, and I kind of thought, I don't really want to work in power stations and, or process plants. Didn't fire me up. So I thought I'd reinvent myself. So back to this Renaissance thing, and get into IT, into software. It was a big thing in the mid to late 90s and early 2000s, and so, which is the time period for this. So I joined a company in Australia that was doing MBA level courses mainly for high technology companies, teaching them how to write plans for venture capital, for raising capital for their companies for growth. And so I became involved with all these software companies. I thought, this is amazing. I've actually got to do it. I don't want to show them how to do plans, because I'd done my MBA by that stage. So I was very adept at that, but I didn't know much about the actual software side itself. So I joined a company in New Zealand, and this is kind of one of those failure stories where joined a company there. Long story short, started at the bottom, kind of in software sales, found a product, convinced the executive team this product would be good for the company. But they gave me the product manager role for it. We grew it, sold it to one of our big telcos here, in terms of a product that they could start to lay on top of their data networks, and started to succeed. And we raised some capital for that, went to the States. That was my first foray into America. Nearly signed a deal with Verizon Wireless, which was going to be spectacular for us. And we failed at the I don't know, the 1 yard line, you'd call it. We got to the 1 yard line, needed to convert, and I think they figured out we were just this tiny little Kiwi company, and they were very concerned about, could we deliver? I to this day believe we could have. But in the end, they gave it to another bigger company than us, even though I think our technology was better and everything about it was better. So we failed, and we had to sort of unravel everything that we'd done in the States and go back to New Zealand with our tail between our legs, and some big lessons learned about how you can get really close to the touchdown, I guess you'd call it in American parlance, and still not convert. And but that experience gave me enough to get into the second software company, and I was ready to become an executive at that point. So they made me general manager in the beginning, but that title changed to president and chief operating officer. And I helped take that company to the States. So that's the one where we lived in America for the 5 year period in San Jose and grew that. And again, it's a story of kind of success that ultimately you could even say that was a failure as well, because Paul, the guy who brought me in, the CEO, he and I built that business, took it to the States, opened up new markets for ourselves, got into dealing with some of the very large pharma Bristol Myers Squibb, Pfizer, and others, and got it to the point where again we raised venture capital, and it's just this unfortunate thing that can happen where Paul was a great guy, great technologist, but the VCs decided he wasn't the right guy to lead the company.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having some headwinds for sure, but it was pretty soul destroying to have that happen. Not only to him, he was my friend as well, but then to see someone else come in again, very much like, God, you've got to watch that comedy series Silicon Valley, because it's exactly what happened. They brought in their own CEO who was just an idiot, and he destroyed the value that we'd created. But in the process, Paul and I both left the company. So that was kind of where I got to this, a failure, I guess. But that's when I remember sitting with my wife and Paul having lunch in Santana Row in San Jose, and just saying, well, what do I do now? And that was when I just thought, I'm going to go diving. And that was kind of and so, and it's one of these things, hopefully the IRS aren't listening, but yeah, it's very hard when you're a foreigner on a L1A visa in the States, you very much get into the US tax system, and getting out of it is not easy. And so I just decided I'm just going to go diving. I had a bit of money behind me from that experience. So I thought, it's going to take 2 years, won't make any money. I'll leave the States. So break my connection with America and in terms of tax systems. And so we went to Malta, and that's where I did a lot of my diving training. So I was really focused on training. End up doing a little bit of work there in terms of guiding and teaching diving, and then returned to New Zealand out there 2 years later, and ready to start this part of my life that I described earlier. So, and that was 2016. So that's probably taken 8 years to get it to the point where we are today, where, we're sort of thinking, we've got this the way we want it now. Is everything perfect? Of course not. But are we living the life we want to live right now? Yes, we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just on a personal note, I actually work for a venture capital backed tech startup right now. So,
right.
So you're not making me feel comfortable, Steve. No. So
Look,
I think I commiserate, and I understand a lot of what you're talking about in your pains.
Yeah. I mean, you hear comments from VCs like, I've never met a CEO I didn't fire. So that's very much the feel. Of course, there's massive. I mean, you need capital to grow. So it was the right decision on our part to do what we did. Did it work out the way we wanted? No. I mean, Paul's still got shares in the company. I've still got a little bit. So maybe we'll make some money out of that at some point when their company finally exits. And it's a big game though, right? The Silicon Valley.
It is. And it's so funny because I'm not a gambling personality. So like for my, for our 22nd anniversary, we went to Vegas like 3 weeks ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't gamble. I don't drink. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't, I don't do the normal stuff you do there, because gambling feels risky to me. It's like, I don't want to risk, the money I earned at a game of chance where the odds are stacked against me. But I work for a tech startup, so I would say the odds are stacked against me.
They kind of are, but at the same time, I kind of think this entrepreneurship is different to gambling. A lot of people think entrepreneurs are risk takers, and to some degree they are, but they take risks where they feel they know something the market doesn't know. I've seen something that no one else has seen. I see a gap. I believe I have the product for that gap, and then you go after it. And if you work hard, you can be immensely successful, as obviously we've seen. But of course, it's the odds are not in your favor for sure. But it's a fun ride, and I think while you're young, I mean, I'm so glad I did that, even though did it twice. I'm so glad I did it twice because it could have worked out for us, and I could be sitting on a super yacht now, and that would be amazing. But equally, that experience has shaped everything that I do now. And I met so many amazing people. Things that, I mean, probably everyone's aware of what's going on in the States right now and how tough it is on the global stage. But when you live there and you hang with Americans, and I've got so much respect. I've got so many good friends. And there is definitely the best of the world there. There's sometimes the worst of the world, and probably everything in between.
Yeah.
But I cherish my time. It was awesome. Really, really good.
Yeah. I've noticed that myself. Even the little bit of time I've got to spend in like completely different places. So I've been to South America a little, been to Southeast Asia, and yeah, I got to spend a little time in Australia. I really cherish those times, like being immersed with different people that feel differently, think differently, care about different stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's changed me profoundly in ways I never expected.
Yeah, and I think there would be a message to that. Whereabouts do you live, Greg? Are we allowed
I
to
live
say
in
that?
Texas.
Right, right. Oh, you're not in Austin, or
I'm a little bit north of Austin, so a place called College
fantastic,
Station. Yeah.
beautiful. Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of the people I met in California, especially the coast, they tend to travel, and so they were very worldly, and they'd seen a lot. Midwest. If you're going to generalize, Midwest and South, maybe not as much, but
Mm-hmm.
Texas is kind of very different. Actually, different in different parts of Texas too, right?
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, yeah. So it's such a fascinating place in terms of the differences. But yeah, the people who've traveled seem to be much more aware of what's going on outside the country, that's for sure. So I'd strongly encourage Americans to travel and experience what's out there. The world is different and there's great perspectives and many of them are different. But I think what I always look for is where's the commonality? Where are we the same? And it was very easy for us to live in the States and get on with Americans. It was gonna, yeah, yeah. You just have to understand, where they're coming from. They very quickly, I think, understand us as well. And Kiwis, that's one thing we're kind of quite chameleon-like as well. We can meld into other cultures fairly easily, I think. Not sure why that is, but yeah,
Yeah. You guys are very, the interactions I've had with Kiwis, very kind, accommodating, funny, pretty much to a
yeah,
person, been funny. And I've
yeah,
always enjoyed my time and experiences with them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We are funny. I think we like a laugh. I don't know if that comes from some of the British background as well or not. The other thing that's a bit bizarre about us, if you visit this country and you don't have a good time, we're quite offended. Not at you. We're not at you. We're offended. What the hell went wrong? If how can you come here and not have a good time? So we'll almost go out of our way to make sure you do. So I think it's a great place for visitors because you get welcomed and people are very interested that you have a good time. We don't we don't take it well if someone goes away and says bad things. We think, what went wrong? Why did
Hmm.
they not have a good time? So
It's interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
Like for me, when I came down to Australia, I ended up staying with my friends, like in-laws or soon to be
Mhm.
in-laws. And they took us in like we were family. They didn't even know us.
Mm.
And after a week, they had to shuffle us across the street to their other friends. These people really didn't know us or had any connection. And they just welcomed us into their home and we
Yeah.
were just part of the family. It was such a cool experience. Like it was universally, like between my wife and I, just like equal parts strange because you're not used to that here in the States, but also just
Mhm.
so warm and welcoming. And something that also stood out to me is everywhere we go. So I use Manners everywhere I go. Right, it doesn't cost you anything; it's
Mhm.
easy to do. And people kept asking me if I was Canadian, and eventually I
Yeah.
started saying,
Yeah.
"No, I'm American. I'm from Texas. Why does everybody keep asking me that?" And they said, "Because you're so polite." They're like, Americans
Yeah,
are rude
exactly.
when they come over here. I was like, oh,
You know what? It is a thing, and sometimes I'll have an American come in and they'll say, "Oh, give me a coffee," and they don't mean anything by it, but in our culture, that is quite rude. We would say, "Give me a coffee, please," or "Could I please have a coffee?"
yeah.
And Canadians do that, and it's they don't mean anything. They don't mean to be rude. It's just a method of communication and the style. And, if I could, if it's one thing, sometimes I think, I really, before they go too much further in this country, I probably should just pull them aside and just say, hey, listen, just add a please on the end of it. And, you'll be welcomed so much more than if you don't. And it's quite unusual. Like I have some New Zealanders come up, and I even, as a bit of a joke to them, tell them how polite they are because there'll be 5 pleases and 13 thank yous in their communication to give us a coffee order. So it is a thing, and yeah, no, keep it up because as you say, it doesn't cost you anything, and it softens everything. I think it makes you more approachable, but this is our culture, right? So, if you're a New Yorker and you don't do that, well, hey, all good.
So I've noticed that a lot of people kind of on the east coast over there tend to like be a little bit more forceful in their communication, a little bit less
Hmm.
polite. Here in the South, it's kind of manners, I think, is more a rule that people anticipate. The West
Yeah,
Coast,
yeah,
everybody just seems
yeah,
so laid back and happy go lucky
yeah,
that
yeah,
it comes off nice anyway.
yeah, exactly.
I'll tell you what, thinking about all the things you've said about inventing yourself over and over, you must, and I mean, it seems to be true. You must learn new stuff constantly. You must really love
Hmm.
the act of like challenging yourself to learn something new.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's by doing that you grow. So I find things that interest me. I mean, something that I didn't cover, which is probably not much in my life now, but when I was a kid, Bruce Lee was the man. Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, right? Chuck's still the man, but it was and so everybody was doing martial arts, karate, and kung fu wasn't a thing here in those days, but everyone was doing karate or judo, and I started doing karate and absolutely loved it. Got reasonably proficient, but then for a whole lot of reasons, including a family breakup, stopped doing it.
Mm.
And when I turned 40, that's when we moved. We lived in Australia for a while. We moved back from Australia, and I thought, I really want to go back to that. And I explored karate again, and I thought, oh God, I just don't want to smash bash, people. And so I found Aikido, and it's a great art. It cops a bit of criticism, and most of it deserved, in that it's a relatively soft art, but it's very, very technical. And I decided I was going to do Aikido. So did that. Long story short, got to do some amazing stuff with that. 7 years later, I had a black belt and trained in Southern California with Matsuoka Sensei and his group at Ikazuchi Dojo. And he was anyone seen Steven Seagal's early movies, he's the Japanese guy who looks quite small. He's actually not that small, but getting thrown around because Seagal's so big. But got to train with them, train with some amazing people here in New Zealand, and achieved a goal that was always in me. And just that act of learning a martial art, I carry some of that learning technique with me today. Learning by observation, learning by feeling. I use that a lot in my diving training. So it was just, you're right. It was, and I felt like you grow so much as a person when you take something on that is hard to accomplish. It might involve some difficulty, some pain, some challenges along the way. And you then move yourself through, you mentioned failure before, move yourself through constant getting it wrong, getting it wrong, getting it wrong, failing, until finally you start to experience some success. And the personal growth and the development of you as a human, I think, is immense through just putting yourself in those positions. I'd still be doing Aikido to this day. Once I got my black belt Shodan, I trained for about another 2 years and started doing a little bit of teaching, but unfortunately I injured my back. And Aikido is an art where you get thrown a lot and
Mm.
have to learn how to land. And yeah, I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I've since fixed that, but I haven't got back to it. And I don't know if I will, to be honest, but it was a bit sad. That was a bit of a sadness to lose that. But I've applied what I learned there in other parts of my life, the discipline, turn up even if you don't feel like it. Not everything's going to feel good. Some things are going to hurt. Um, and I apply that in my fitness training, in my diving training and teaching. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people said to me at that time, because that's when I hit the diving pretty hard too, midlife crisis at 40. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it is that, but I kind of would prefer to look at it from the point of view that I knew I was 40 and felt like I had some things I hadn't achieved and I wanted to pick up the pace. And yeah, I wasn't going to be satisfied by buying a motorcycle or a sports car or getting
Well,
divorced or any of that sort of rubbish. I wanted to do things that would enrich me that I had always wanted to do. So hence the diving, the martial arts, the other stuff that's come with that.
yeah, I'm in my early 40s, and I don't know that I would necessarily quantify it as a midlife crisis, but
Hmm.
I don't know. I kind of see it as I'm starting to really learn who I am as a person. Like early in life, I was so busy, just staying busy and trying to figure things out and get it all together, that I'm just now starting to figure out what I really want, who I really am, the things I like. And I like challenging myself to stuff now. Like, can I do this? You know what? I've gotten to the point now too, there's I want to start doing kind of like a speaking circuit sort of thing. I've never done that before. I love getting in front of people in public speaking, which is funny because that was tantamount to like death when in my younger years. Like
Sure.
I would never want to do that stuff. But my wife was asking me, he's like, because I started putting energy into it, and I think I'm almost ready for like my first go at this.
Wow.
And she said, "Why are you doing this?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't know yet. I just know it feels good." And something's going to come out of it. Because I've learned that, like, so much of what I do, there's all these unexpected things, these benefits that come from it, and I can never quantify. Like, my brain is just not good enough at like making the wall with all the red string where everything ties together, and it just happens to work out. Like, so this is a thing I want to challenge myself to. I want to do it, and I want to see what happens. Something's going to happen. I just don't know what. And to me, that's kind of exciting.
Talking to you now and listening to this, I think you're going to be great. And listening to you speak well. Your voice has a nice resonance to it, and this is all part of it. And you're very relaxed. And I think, I remember in the Navy, I was an officer, and public speaking is a leadership skill as well. And they were trying to train us in public speaking, and they did. And every lunchtime, we have to walk into what's called the gun room. It's kind of your common area, and someone would be selected to give an impromptu 5-minute speech on a subject that you were given. It's a little bit like Toastmasters, I guess. And we were terrified of it. We'd walk into that room as if we were going to the gallows, and I remember so many, face plants and disasters of those, a couple of successes, of course. But all it does is it gets you used to this skill set of standing up and without prepared notes, being able to communicate from what's inside there. And over time, you get better and better and better at it. And then, of course, as an officer in the military, quite often you're required to stand up in front of your team, your group, whatever it is, and your subordinates, and you're supposed to deliver a talk about something. And so through that time in the Navy, I became better and better at public speaking. And now I don't think I'm bad at it either. I've given talks at conferences and so on. It's not something that I particularly want to pursue. However, I can see for you that it's going to be brilliant. I honestly, and I understand the value of it in terms of leadership, in terms of being able to do something that not many people can do as well. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I absolutely am. And I'm curious if you see this as well. But for me, I found out like this public speaking, this improvisation, exactly what you're talking about. You have to come up with something on the spot, and you have to be able to speak intelligently about it and come up with maybe interesting perspectives or something like that. It's a muscle that I didn't have, right? And so just like you go to the gym, just like there's any new skill, I had to work at it and work at it. And I've noticed too, if I don't get persistent practice, which is exactly what this is, persistent practice, that muscle will atrophy a little bit. Do you find that to be the case?
I do. Yeah. And it's a big thing being able to do that. One thing that comes to mind right now is stand-up comedians. Yeah, and you're near Austin, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a great comedy scene there, and that's exactly what they do. They practice their skill over and over and over, practice their material until it's ready for prime time, and then they go on the road if they're good enough, of course. But that's something that kind of in the back of my mind, because I try to be a funny guy, I like to, and that's something I wouldn't mind a crack at, is having a go at stand up. But that's scary, right? Because the audiences are brutal, and and half the battle is dealing with that. So, but it's a similar thing, isn't it? Being able to stand up in front of an audience, put yourself out there, deliver your material in a compelling way, make them laugh. And I think it's a key thing, even in public speaking, is having a little bit of humor in there. Goes a long way to softening the audience. I love your opener, for instance, your fantasy meal. So, yeah, you'll go well, I'm sure.
There is something special about leading a crowd of people, and I think you've probably experienced this probably in the military and in other facets of your life. But for me, I found it especially true. I've got to perform ceremonies for 3 weddings, so to marry people. And there is something so exhilarating about having a crowd and being able to tell a story, have them laugh, and then make them cry, and then have them
Yeah.
laugh again, and then make them think. Like hear that audible recognition of, oh, I've never thought of that before. Like I
Yeah.
love that, and I'm not 100% certain what that is. I've heard somebody once described it to me as charisma. Like you're being
Yes.
charismatic. You're
Hmm.
but then they were saying that charisma, like if you take it down to like the Latin or Greek root, it's to respire, to breathe, and you're breathing out yourself, and the audience is breathing you in. And I'm such a visual
Hmm.
person. I was like, wow,
Right.
that really feels like a real
Yeah.
kind of connection piece there. And you're, I mean, I think it's funny because you said you started your podcast to feel more connected to your community and stuff, but that's also what
Hmm.
you're doing, right? You're being charismatic, you're meeting all these people, and you're carrying it. So you're
Yeah.
still getting that little taste of it from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I find it interesting. I was hanging with some pretty awesome divers in Mexico when I went to do some training there. And they said something to me which ultimately I was quite proud about. And they said, gee, you're really easy to talk to, Steve, and I found I was talking to these guys, and next thing they're telling me their life story. And I wondered where that came from, and I wondered how I got to that point. And it was very, I think it is very much the podcast where you're talking to people and you're asking them open questions about themselves. You're less, I mean, obviously this podcast is, I get to talk about me a bit, and I often do what you're doing, I think really well too, is, we share perspectives, and it's a to and fro. It's not a one way street. It's a discussion. But I find that I'm able to do that. I'm able to talk to people and open them up and have them share things with me, which then I think is great, because I think that friendships are built from that too, where you get to know each other at a deeper level rather than just superficial. So yeah, that was an interesting sort of perspective that they gave me on myself, and I was a bit taken aback at first, and then I thought about the conversations we'd had, and I had them telling me about everything, a little bit like this, tell me your life story almost, but not in so many words. So yeah, it's a good skill, and I think this thing of podcasting is not easy either, is it? It's challenging, and it's not always easy to be your best all of the time because it's all impromptu. We don't tend to script these parts of it, so you've got to be able to work on the fly and come up with your product.
That's what I love. That's the part that really tickles my brain. It's
Hmm.
flying without a parachute. I'm doing the high wire act with no net. I love it. Can we keep it going? Can we make it interesting? Right? Can we have it so that not only you're engaged, but the listeners find value in it? It's such
Yeah,
a fun high wire act. Like I
yeah,
truly enjoy it.
exactly.
Yeah, but we have I know I tickled at it at the beginning, and it truly fascinates me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about your side mount diving stuff, if we could,
Hmm.
because it
Yeah.
genuinely, it's something you said kind of woke me up just a little bit about it. You were saying that, first you have to be a diver. Second, it sounded like you have to be a very good diver after that, and then you can kind of pursue that. So I was just thinking in my head, have you ever met anybody that said, yeah, I got into diving purely because I wanted to do the cave diving? Or is this usually something like, I've been diving a long time and I want to challenge myself in this new way? Like how does
Yeah.
that usually come about?
That would be the usual way. Is I've been doing this for a while, and for me, it's quite interesting in New Zealand here, because I dived for 25 years before I really started to progress my diving,
Really long time.
and most of that diving was holidays. I'd go overseas to the tropics, to Fiji or in the South Pacific or somewhere like that. When I was with a software company, I'd take my dive gear on trips overseas a lot too, and so I got to dive in Croatia and Turkey and crazy places. And Fujairah here in the United Arab Emirates as well. So yeah, it's just some crazy stuff there. But I'm here in New Zealand. It's a really, really big deal to be hunting, and everybody here is either spearfishing, freediving, or they're capturing what we call crayfish, which is kind of lobster, very similar to the red spiny lobster, Californian species. And it's a big deal. And so often if you go diving here, people will ask, what did you get? Did you get a crayfish? And And I, myself and a bunch of my colleagues here decided to stop hunting about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe 15 now. And it was very much for environmental and
Mm.
conservation reasons. You know, I started diving in the 70s and it was just unbelievable then. I mean, you'd look under any rock and there'd be a crayfish there. And it's not the case anymore, especially around the big cities. So, you know, it is a stock that's under pressure. So I decided I would stop doing that. And the other thing then was I was just a bit sick of looking under rocks all the time. I wanted to enjoy the actual diving and the environment more. So I thought, okay, I'm going to work on my diving. So I started working on it, and it was during my dive master course. It's kind of the beginnings of the instructor levels or professional levels that my instructor was a technical diver. And technical diving is diving where you need to, because of the depth you're going to or the environment you're going into, so an overhead where you don't have a direct route to the surface if you have a problem, you need to carry more equipment, you need to do more training. And so that's technical diving. So he was a technical diver, and he was the first one who mentioned side mount to me. I thought, side mount, what is that? And he goes, oh, you have the two cylinders on the side of your body, and it's good for cave diving. And I didn't want to cave dive, but I thought, that sounds interesting. So early days, not early days of the internet, but it would have been 2010 this at this stage. So I jump on YouTube, which was fairly new then, and I found this guy, Steve Bogarts, in Mexico. And Steve's a cave explorer. He is what or was one of the most preeminent explorers in Mexico of the modern era. Unfortunately, he doesn't dive anymore because he got really bad decompression sickness. So it's a bit sad. But there was this video of Steve in a cenote, which is this beautiful crystal clear water, if you've ever seen them in Yucatan, Mexico, motionless, like this, still in the water in this side mount configuration, super streamlined, just looked epic. And he was just not moving. And, you know, I've seen most people diving, but there's like they're just swimming around all the time to maintain their buoyancy in the water column. And Steve was motionless. And then he started doing skills. And then he started swimming upside down and on his side. And it was just so mesmerizing to me. I thought, I got to do that. So it was more this thing of, wow, look at this guy. And I spoke to Patrick Widman, who's a very famous cave explorer who I've trained with recently. And he said, Steve, you just watched Roger Federer play tennis and decided that you were going to be Roger Federer. So that was the level of Steve Bogarts. But over the years, I'm not Roger Federer for sure, but I've started to approach those levels through a lot of diving and a lot of training. And as you go through that side mount training, it invariably leads you to cave diving, or at least to understand that you are now diving the configuration for it. So in 2013, I went to Mexico and did side mount training and cave training there, and with no real thought of anything other than I want to dive like Steve Bogarts. It was not about the caves, it was about the skill level.
Yeah, acquiring the skills.
And yeah, but then you go, you know, you do your training and they blindfold you and you've got to do everything blindfolded, and you're dealing with issues, and it's quite, it's awesome training. I actually loved it. You learn how to do all the line work, and you learn redundancy, having multiple gas sources and gas planning, making sure there's all these rules around cave diving that, in my parlance from the military, are written in blood. Somebody died for this rule. And the first important rule of cave diving is always have a continuous guideline to the exit. So you run a line in, you run a line out. Often there's fixed lines in the cave. So you run a line and tie into the fixed line, dive the fixed line, and then come back and remove your line on the way out. So there's always this, if the shit hits the fan and visibility is gone and you don't know where you are, you can grab this line and follow it out. And so that's the first rule. There's rules around you must have a redundant gas supply, so 2 gas sources. You must plan your gas consumption. So typically you use 1/3 of the gas on the way in, 1/3 of your gas on the way out, and there's 1/3 left as a reserve or a contingency. We carry 2 or 3 lights in case one light fails. You've got another one, and you've got another one. Carry 2 or 3 cutting devices, 2 computers. Yeah, all of these sorts of things are rules that are written, excuse me, around cave diving. And so I was starting to learn all of those. But then you go into the cave, and you've probably seen pictures of dry caves with stalactites coming
Hmm.
down, stalagmites coming up, crystal formations, fossils of long extinct creatures, giant clams, invertebrates, bones of extinct mammals, reptiles in some cases. Just this amazing museum of natural history that is made by nature, not by man. And it's such an experience to go in there. And it's, for me, the compelling part is the equipment, the training, the skill set. It is the highest skill set of diving. Like if you say what is the pinnacle of diving, there is very deep decompression diving. But I think cave diving is a level even above that. Because sometimes you combine the two together. You can cave dive and decompression dive as well. So just this ability to be still in the water, the ability to be motionless while you conduct skills such as tying into lines, the ability, because if you don't, you're going to silt the cave out. And typically when you enter most of these caves, the water is gin clear, crystal clear, and that in itself is very compelling. But if you stir up the silt on the bottom, which could be meters deep in some cases, you're going to come out and see nothing. It'll be zero visibility, and you've got to grab the line, and then it's not quite so much fun. So yeah, there's this amazing, compelling thing that you kind of inch your way into. And then, of course, there's levels in cave diving. I'm what I call a holiday cave diver. So because I don't live in a cave region, I go on a holiday cave dive. And because of that, I have to temper my enthusiasm, I would say. There's places in the cave I shouldn't go,
Hmm.
that I have the skill set for, but I don't have the immediate confidence or comfort level. And this is going through little small restrictions, where you might go in and everything's clear, but as soon as you turn around, you made a mess. And so now you've got to come out in zero visibility, banging into things, squeezing through. I don't mind that so much, but you've got to remember that, this is where problems can happen. So, and if you live in a cave region and do that every day, your comfort level and your experience grows. So I holiday cave dive. I enjoy it. I know where my limitations are. And the key to longevity in cave diving is knowing when to stop and turn around. And so that's kind of the very, very key. Is it a skill set or a mentality towards cave diving, is making sure you know when it's time to turn around versus push forward.
It sounds like a lot of your motivation. This is the satisfaction of overcoming a challenge, right? Would you say that's accurate? Like you see one
Yeah.
challenge, you mount that, and it sounds like you're being
Hmm.
very methodical about it. Like you were saying, get up to your comfort level and then develop those skills to move a little bit further and a little bit further. So it's just
Yeah.
I'm going to challenge myself a little more. So it's not in my head. I kind of thought maybe it was some kind of adrenaline thing, like it to like squeeze into these extreme openings, like you said. Like to me, that freaks me
Yeah.
out. But it's not necessarily, oh, I'm going to get this big rush from it. It's a challenge, and I'm going to practice. I'm going to train. I'm going to have the equipment. I'm going to build all the skills to overcome a challenge. Do you feel like that's more
You
representation?
described that 100%. And when you said that, often people do think it's an adrenaline sport. It's actually a Zen sport. So you need to be relaxed. You need to be mentally very, very relaxed. I try to have a thing. Some people do rush around in caves, but I try to have a thing. Like go in super slowly, and then if you need to come out fast, you can, but just come out slowly. And then if you get caught, I mean, I can tell a tale. Maybe this will freak a few people out, but I was diving with some very experienced cave divers. I'd been diving consistently in Australia, and we got to the end of one of the lines. We're about 600 meters at this point from the exit, so we're a fair way in.
That's a
And
long
then
way.
there's a small tunnel with a line that as soon as the first diver went through, it was silted out. So you're following the line in there, and then it goes to this vertical fissure that goes straight up for 8 meters. We're at about 16 meters. So you're in the end of a tunnel. There's a little area where two divers can pretty much lay next door to each other, and then you go straight up. But the fissure is only just wide enough for your body to go through. So, and the diver I was with was a super experienced explorer, great guy. I won't name any names because that doesn't help the story. But great guy. He said, like, he just pointed up and said, "Go up there." So I'm on a closed circuit rebreather, so I'm all good. So I go up and I wiggle through, and I'm ascending through and wiggle, 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 and I get myself up to the top, and then it opens up into this big chamber. So now we're kind of from 16 meters deep to 8 meters deep in this chamber. I have a bit of a swim around, and it's a little bit silted because of what I've done, but it's relatively clear. I turn around and look down, and they're not coming. And I think, okay. So I'm waiting, and they're still not coming. So I look down the thing, and I can't really see because I've silted it out. I can see their lights at the bottom. So after 5 minutes, I thought they're obviously not coming. I'll go back down, and I turned vertical to go face down, back down this fissure. But I'm in a dry suit, and there's gas inside your dry suit that helps to keep you warm. But when you go vertical, all that gas goes up to your feet. So I'm basically got all this gas in my feet, which makes your feet want to go up, and I want to go down. And I go down this fissure, and I get stuck. So now I'm stuck in the fissure with gas in my dry suit boots. So that's pulling me up. I want to go down, and I can't move. And I'm thinking the thoughts that you would probably think, right? This is very uncomfortable, and I don't like this. So I had a bit more of a squeeze, and often you can grind your way through. You just keep pushing, and it's limestone, right? So it's gonna break. But I was getting more and more uncomfortable. I thought, I don't like this. So I basically pulled myself backwards and out again, and had a bit of a think about it. And I knew at that point in the cave that there was another tunnel that went to another part of the cave that I knew about, had dived before, and I knew I could exit that way. But I knew there were 2 restrictions on that path as well. So I laid some cookies, little markers that show where you've been and show the exit side of the lines. Laid some cookies and went through the first restriction on this other route, but then got to the second one, and it was pretty gnarly as well. So it was very, very flat. I would have had to grind through that. And I thought, it's not really any better than where I was before. So I came back, picked up all my markers, put them away, had another look. They were still there, and I was on a rebreather. Here's the good thing about rebreather diving. Rebreathers are where you have a close open circuit. You breathe in through a regulator from your cylinder, and you breathe in, and then you breathe out. All the bubbles go out, and that gas is lost. On a rebreather, it's a closed cycle. So you basically breathe in from the loop that the gas is in. When you breathe out, it goes through a scrubber that removes the CO2. And then you add some more oxygen to it to bring it back up. Generally, we consume, say, 5% of the oxygen per breath, 21 down to 16. Replenish the oxygen, and then you can just keep rebreathing that loop pretty much forever. Eventually, your scrubber will not be able to remove any more CO2. So that's one of your limitations. The other limitation is how much oxygen you can carry. But it's really just a small amount of oxygen on, every now and again you need to add to the loop. So it changes your dives from being, on open circuit where you're losing all the gas, maybe a couple of hours, depending on how many cylinders you can carry, maybe 3. But now I can go for 6 hours with this. Wow. And it gives you a lot of comfort when you're in this situation. So I'm there thinking, okay, this sucks, but I've got hours to solve this problem. And so I thought, okay, so I just dropped every molecule of gas out of my dry suit, that entered that all out. And then got everything as streamlined as I could, move all of my equipment behind me. And I actually got back through the hole pretty easily and met up with the guys, and they were pretty worried. They thought I might be panicking or, what's going on. And they had got stuck going up is what had happened. So they couldn't get up through the fissure. And so I got back down. We were all pretty happy to see each other, and we, went out of the cave. And I kind of, as much as that experience sucked, I was a bit elated when I got back. Elated because obviously I got out of the cave, which was great, but elated because I felt like my skill level and comfort level had taken a jump, and that I'd been through that tough experience. I'd thought about the problem, I'd solved the problem, and I had finished my dive. So there's a cave diving story. There's plenty of those, but it is an interesting sport or pastime, if you like, and
that's intense. I just realized I was holding my breath for a portion of your conversation. Obviously, you made it out okay. You're in front of me, but
exactly.
Yeah. That's what you're talking about. Like the opposite of adrenaline. Because have you ever noticed whenever they try and interview athletes after a match or something, that is not the time to be talking to somebody. And
Yeah.
like whenever we get, this is something I learned, whenever you get adrenaline dumped into your body like that, it pulls blood away from your brain. It moves it to your
Yes.
extremities. Your fight or flight kicks in so that you can run.
Yeah.
And so which is insane because in moments where you need to really think, you need to cogitate, you need to be present, it is sometimes the hardest thing to do. And so like what you're talking about, for most people, if some sense of panic sets in, that kicks off that fight or flight and you're unable to, and in some of my past, jobs, because I've heard somebody to say before, like, you know, something they absolutely hate. They're like, my body doesn't know the difference between a bear attack or me having to clean my entire house in 2 hours. And it's like sometimes some stuff like is scary, and
Yeah.
we'd be in these engineering scenarios where we're just IT guys. Something would go wrong, and they would. And I always used to tell my junior engineers, I said, whenever it happens the first time, you're going to fold like a lawn chair. So just be ready. Don't beat yourself up. Don't be ashamed because your body just has this response and you have to like condition it. You have to train it. But there's something different about training and conditioning and you just having to experience it. You having to get those repetitions. And I can see why it would feel like you just climbed a mountain. Like the amount of pride you would have that like, hey, I held this, because I mean, genuinely that could have been a life or death scenario if you didn't react correctly. So I 100% see what you're talking about, why you have to be so methodical about all of this. You can't come in half-cocked. This isn't something somebody could come into and 4 months later they're doing these sort of things. Like you
Correct. Yeah. And it
genuinely
is,
have to put work in.
you're absolutely spot on. And there's a lot to unpack in what you just said as well, because it's the people who perish in caves. I mean, obviously, cave divers do succumb from time to time, but it's most often in history has been people who shouldn't be there. Like 2000, I'm a petty master scuba diver, 2000 dives in open water, and like got a unrealistic confidence in their own ability, who then decide to swim into a cave. And quite often that ends badly because it is very, very specialized and it's a very, very special environment. Obviously, there have been problems with real cave divers for sure, and that is tragic. And almost invariably, what happens is this panic, and it, as you rightly say, the squirt of adrenaline is the first thing that happens, and then that adrenaline is designed to prepare our bodies for fight or flight. So the first thing that happens with that is our respiration rate increases, and you tend to, in a diving sense, what happens when your respiration rate increases is you can overbreathe your system. So, i.e., it can't deliver enough gas for your increased respiration rate. So then you start to build up CO2 in the breathing cycle, and CO2 is really bad when there's too much, and it has psychological effects on you. It has physiological effects on you, but none of them are good, and all of them lead you down this path to panic. And as soon as you panic underwater, you almost invariably are dead. So you cannot panic. It's very, very hard to come back from that. So you've got to come back. You've got to recognize when this is starting to happen. So, i.e., when I was stuck in that restriction, I was starting to feel these feelings well up in me. This, fight or flight. It was just the beginning of it. So my decision to back out was based on that. But had I not been able to back out, the way to deal with that then is to stop. And this is even this at the open water level, they teach you this on your PADI open water courses: stop, breathe, think, and then act. And this can apply outside of diving as well. So the best thing to do if you're faced with an incredibly stressful situation, stop what you're doing. Take 3 really deep breaths. Just let yourself settle down. Take those deep breaths, and then you'll find almost invariably your mind will be clearer because you've stopped the effect of adrenaline. You've taken that down a notch, such that the physiological and psychological responses are going to be much more reasoned, and you're going to be able to make a good decision. And when you're in a bad, the trouble with cave diving and diving in general versus mountaineering, for instance, if you make a mistake in mountaineering, it's very quick. You're going to fall, and it's not going to take long for you to find the bottom, right? In diving, it's very slow. So you typically, unless you run out of gas, you are going to be there for a few hours, probably knowing that you're not going to get out. So, but those few hours are critical, and so it's kind of like saying, okay, I'm in a really tough situation here now. Things have gone really badly wrong. I'm going to stop for a few seconds and just get my head together, and just so stop and breathing, and then you start to think through, okay. And a very famous diver, Jill Heineth, taught me through this on my podcast, which was kind of like, you just need to take little steps on the path to survival, and little successes along the way then eventually lead to the big success you hope. And just taking those really key little beginning steps is what you're looking for, is making from you may have made a bad decision to get yourself in this situation. Let's not make any more bad decisions. Let's start to make good decisions now that are going to get me out of this. And that's what we train for. That's what we hope we'll do if you get in that situation. And as I said, I think you've alluded, a lot of this is applicable in other facets of our lives. I know in fighting, it's the same thing. I mean, can you imagine going into a UFC cage and what that would feel like? And no,
Not at my age.
yeah, I mean, no, hell no. But we're not, certainly not at mine. But because I've sort of been in martial arts, you kind of have that thinking of what's it like to fight for real, and unless you've been in that situation, you don't know. But you get a massive adrenaline dump. Your vision narrows. Your ability to execute fine motor skills goes away. So all your primo techniques that you thought you knew, now you can't do them anymore. And so you've got to rely on this ability to deal with that adrenaline dump, the ability to widen your focus again, and your ability to execute gross motor skills that will help you in that situation. So they're all very similar in that physiological and psychological response. And and as you say, I mean, even in business or work, you can get, imagine an aggressive customer coming at you, in my coffee shop. How do you deal with that? Do you want to fight back, and or do you want to take a breath and go, okay, how am I going to make this better?
Yeah. What's funny is that's always been I'm not saying I want every customer to be an unhappy one, but that was one of my favorite things to do, was to take an upset customer and by the end of it, have them say thank you. Like that was always my goal, and I would usually win. It's another fun little game to play kind of in the moment on the improv. But what you're describing to me, I wrote down something and I put a lot of asterisks by it. Little steps on the path to survival. I love that. Like I think half the people I know should get that tattooed on their forearm so they could see it every day. That's
yeah. And
brilliant line.
I'll give credit to Jill Heineth for that. She's very famous, and so it's actually not mine, but it's one I've taken from. Again, you learn so much doing these podcasts, don't you?
Yeah.
And just talking to people and learning their perspectives, and I treat life like a smorgasbord or a buffet as well. There'll be parts of the buffet that I think, I'm not eating that, that's rubbish, but this bit over here, that's me, and so I take things like that and just meld them into my being as well. And I think it's a good way to look at life.
You're doing something that I am guilty of myself. And so every time somebody tells me something fascinating, I had gotten so used to citing my sources, is what I like to call, like I'm writing a thesis, because I want this person to have credit. Like they gave me this gift, and I want to honor that gift by telling everybody else. But I've had conversations where literally every third sentence I have to give credit to this person. At some point, I wonder, like, I have said some of these so many times that they've essentially become part of me, right? And so maybe that's still honoring the gift. Like, I don't know.
And look,
I still struggle with that.
Who knows whether Jill was the first person to say that? It probably was Sheik Exley or someone before her, So she may well have taken that from someone else. So I think there's no copyright on this, but I think it's great in some ways. Maybe we're being humble when we do that and saying, hey, listen, this isn't something, I'm no genius. I'm just someone who's good enough to listen to smart people and take it on board. But at some point, and I think, what we can do from that is the application of it, right? Or the taking that concept Jill's concept from cave diving and saying, hey, that's actually applicable to business or to something else. And that's our, our contribution to the building of that thought process.
Mm. Something else when you were describing all of that, it made me think of Apollo 11. Like, you have these people in an unfortunate situation. The clock is ticking. They do have time. They have to stop. They have to evaluate everything around them. What do we have? What's at my disposal? How do I solve this problem? And they started doing it, just like the old saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So you just, what's the first thing? All right, accomplish that with what we have available to you. I mean, it seems like in your scenario, there's not a whole lot of, you're not going to be able to take your tube sock off and make some kind of filter over here and do that. So it's a very finite number of things you can do. But, well, speaking of filters, you were talking about the CO2 scrubber. Is that like a chemical scrubber, like some kind of canister?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, softener lime.
So it's like passive.
I should know. Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it's a chemical reaction between the CO2 and it's called softener lime. I want to say calcium carbonate, but I think that's wrong. Guy, I should know. I'm an engineer, right? Yeah, I can look that up and send it to you. But yeah, softener lime. So it's a lime that basically removes CO2. There's a chemical reaction, and then it changes the composition of the softener lime itself. And so what goes through is the rest of the gases, the oxygen, the nitrogen, and the CO2 is taken out.
So what you were saying earlier, if your respiration really picks up, it can only absorb so much so fast. So that's where
exactly. Yeah. So if you're the faster you're breathing, the more work that you are doing underwater, the lower the duration of that softener lime, or the shorter the period it will last. So, again, back to being relaxed is good, and temperature has an impact on it as well. So if it's very cold, it's less effective in terms of the chemical reaction as well. So, yeah, in your life, you are relying on that chemical reaction as well. Thankfully, it's 100% consistent until it's not. So what we don't have is we don't have any way of really knowing when the chemical reaction is stopping. So we basically just have conservative durations that we apply to the softener lime, which seems to work. So
that's cool. Yeah. That's fascinating. How long has the rebreather stuff been around? It's been a while, right?
Yeah, quite a while. I want to say way back to the sort of 19th century almost. Concepts of rebreather technology have been around, and they were certainly developed during the wars in terms of attack divers using oxygen rebreathers, where they were limited to 6 meters or 10 feet in depth. Or 6 meters, 18 feet in depth. Yeah, sorry, I'm not good on imperial, but so they've been around for quite a long time. They, in terms of use in technical diving, it really started to grow a lot in the 1990s. Sadly, though, in the early days, there were quite a few fatalities, again, using this technology. It's quite unforgiving if you get it wrong. It's become, in the last 10 years, I want to say, much, much more prevalent, though. And the systems are much more reliable. The training is much better. And we're having less issues, let's call it that way. But it's still something that is at the pointy end of diving. It's not something that your average diver is going to do, but it's a very, very good tool for cave diving, for deeper decompression diving, wreck diving, and so on, where it's actually safer for that sort of diving than using open circuit because of the my cave or rebreather instructor, Ed Sorensen, another very famous guy in Mariana, Florida. He had a saying, it takes away gas stress, i.e. how much gas do I have, distance stress, how far am I in the cave, and time stress, how much time do I have. And so that's a really, really good safety point for rebreathers, but they're not for the faint-hearted or the beginning diver either. So
something I was imagining in my head, if you were using kind of like a standard rig, every time you go into a cave, there'd be some amount of air that would build up, and eventually that would, because there's a lot of pressure and air will compress, whereas water doesn't compress as much. But eventually you'd get enough to where it would maybe make kind of it would like affect the overall experience of the cave, right? So I guess the rebreathers kind of keep it a little bit more natural.
Yeah, There's two sides to that. So yeah, you do get air pockets from expired gas, and sometimes they're breathable to some degree as well. Still be 16% or so oxygen in them. And so there's a few times where people have been out of gas and they've come up to that air pocket and had a little breathe in there for a wee while. It'll make you feel a little lightheaded as the O2 level drops, but there's still something in that. The other thing that you get from that is you get a mirror effect. So when you shine your light up on it, it actually, the surface is generally very still, and it creates this like glass mirror above you, which is pretty cool. The downside is it creates a thing called percolation, which is as the bubbles go up, they mechanically disrupt the limestone ceiling of the cave, and it starts to rain down on you and destroy the visibility. And some caves are more subject to percolation, and shipwrecks for that matter as well. So rebreathers are good from that point of view, in that you don't get percolation. There's no expired bubbles.
Yeah.
And it's also good for marine life when you want to interact with marine life. The bubbles will often scare them. That's quite noisy. And so rebreather diving is very quiet in comparison to open circuit diving. So it's actually quite a nice experience.
That's cool.
Yeah, being at one with the water, and yeah.
Like in my brain, I never put shipwreck diving alongside cave diving, but I guess it's entering inside of a, like, what would you, I mean, what is it? Are they generally treated as two different things, or does it feel very similar?
Yeah. There's a lot of similarities, and then there are differences. They are treated the same from the point of view that they're both regarded as overhead diving. So you have an overhead, which means that you can't swim through the cave ceiling or through the deck head of a shipwreck and go directly to the surface. And when you're an entry-level diver, one of your responses to an emergency is to ditch your weights and go to the surface. So, i.e., don't drown. And so, the in a shipwreck or in a cave, you can't do that because you've got to extract yourself by swimming a route to get back out again. So they're the same for that reason. Some of the same techniques apply for line work in particular as well. But then the differences come, and caves are made naturally through geological processes, through dissolution of limestone over tens or hundreds of thousands of years. Shipwrecks are made by man. They're designed for human beings to move through them. So they have deck levels, they have ladders, they have doors, they have corridors, passages. And so you can use those to navigate the ship. You can, especially if you've got a layout and you've studied the layout. So usually with wreck diving, we'll study the plans of the ship and we'll make a determination we want to go to this part of the ship. And you'll have a route that you will swim to do that. You may lay lines for part of that. You may not. You might put strobes in to help you navigate out. But whatever you do, you're very conscious of the fact that you cannot get lost. So we practice a lot what happens if we get lost, and hence the lines help with that. But wrecks, you can use the line of the wreck. You cannot use the line of the cave because one cave passage looks a lot like another. And so line work in caves is vital. You'd never go in a cave without a line. And so they're the similarities. The other things are caves can have collapses. They are not that common in terms of a collapse occurring while you're swimming through the cave, although that has happened. And part of the reason for that is that there's a hydraulic effect of the flooded passage that supports the cave ceiling. And so the cave ceiling tends not to collapse on that. When you start to get air pockets, you can then get a collapse occur, and that's where you get sinkholes forming. So there'll be some air there, and that will eventually erode, and then you'll get a sinkhole or a cenote and an access to the cave, and that's how all of the access points are created, through these sinkholes. So that can happen. So that's a little bit obviously dangerous. Shipwrecks, similar. I mean, it's metal in salt water. Metal in salt water corrodes, and eventually all shipwrecks break down to nothing. Or to a debris field. And so, but they're there for a long time. I mean, there's shipwrecks from World War One, World War Two that we dive fairly regularly, and some even older. Great Lakes is full of shipwrecks that date back to the 19th century. So there's lots of awesome shipwrecks that have been around for a long time, but you need to be aware that they can and do collapse, and that the structure can be very fragile. So what you touch, what you interact with in there, you need to take a lot of care with that. And yeah. And then there's another type of diving, mine diving, on top of that, where you're diving old mines, and that's a little bit like a cross between the two. It looks a bit like a cave, but it's made by man. And so there's all these tunnels that are made with, with equipment and everything in them, and they'll often flood once the mine's finished because of the water table. And that can be, I haven't done that. That's something that's in my future, is to go and do some mine diving in Thailand, I think. So it's, or Europe. There's great mines in Europe as well.
Hmm. So I'm trying to put myself in your, I almost said shoes, in your flippers, I guess, to
Mhm.
see like how would it feel? And in my brain, it feels like going into a cave would have a different feel than it would be in a ship. Like the cave, it's sometimes that some things that strike me is when I see something that's made by nature that seems incredible. Like I have this sense of awe associated with it that I wouldn't have otherwise. And like you said, you might be seeing something that maybe only a handful of humans will ever be able to see this thing. And to me, that's a fascinating thing. But also the idea of moving through a man-made structure that's sunk. There's some kind of, I don't know, probably kind of an ethereal nature to it. Like there's this thing that, once was and is no more, but I can still sort of explore it like kind of in a time capsule sort of thing. Like,
Yeah.
does it sort of like feel different in that way to you?
Yeah, it does. I think, and it's exactly that. When you're diving a cave, you're feeling nature, and you're
Mm.
feeling what took tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years to create.
Mm.
As I said, sometimes you find fossils and bones and so on, and so you're understanding that animals were either in this cave or had fallen into this cave at some point. So that's and then the crystal formations in some of them are just, they better than any jewelry that you'll ever
Mm.
find. These amazing structures, and it's just amazing to be able to see this. I'm thinking the crystal caves of Abaco in the Bahamas, for example, or the caves in Sulawesi, Indonesia. Just these amazing, amazing formations. So that in itself is something. Shipwrecks all shipwrecks have a story, and it's a human story. People built that ship, people worked on that ship, maybe people died on that ship. Um, it's and seeing how they move through the ship, and seeing the different compartments, and knowing what they were used for. I mean, one of my favorite wrecks is the HMNZS Canterbury, which is a former Navy warship frigate that I was very fortunate to serve on three
Hmm.
times. I served on a sister ship, the identical class, twice as well. So I had a total of, I think, 8 years on this class of ship. I started as an apprentice engineer in 1981, so very, very junior, 19-year-old. And then in 1992, so not that long later, I was the chief engineer, or the marine engineer officer of that ship. So I had a pretty stellar career there, but got to do everything in terms of working on that ship. It was my home. And so when it was sunk at the dive wreck, the people who sunk it did an absolutely awesome job, and it's positioned upright in between. The top of the ship's at about 14 meters, but the hull sits from 32 to 37 meters. So well within recreational diving depths. Excuse me. And so now I get to dive it. And I started diving it in 2008, the first year, and did some diving. And then as my training progressed in wreck diving and cave diving, and I've got advanced certifications in both, I now can dive every compartment on the ship. And just last weekend, I dived into the boiler room of it, which is very, very deep in the ship. And it's full of these monster pack horse crayfish. They're as big as small dogs, are literally
Whoa,
like this big,
that's wild.
and thousands of them inside there. It's a seething mass of life. It's unreal, but they mess up the visibility, and I hate it. It's my space. It's supposed to be crystal clear in there, and these, yeah, they're absolute delicacies here, right? People like dream of catching one of these, and there's thousands, and it's in an area that's called a rahui. It's a Maori no take zone, which means that you cannot take any marine life for food from there. And so it's pretty awesome to see them in there, and at the same time, they're ruining my space. But I know, actually, I did a video. It's on my YouTube channel from last weekend, where I narrate my dive through their wreck, and talk about where I enter, and then penetrating the ship and going down into the boiler room and pointing out different parts of this is this piece of machinery. This is the the feed pumps for the boilers. This is the boiler console. This is the fuel pumps. This is the feed tanks. And I'm going through there and through this door and up and around. And so it takes you through that route, and you can see how the visibility is really down as well. But I know it like my home. You could put a blindfold on me, and I'm pretty confident I can find my way through that wreck because I lived on it for 8 years. I wrote a book on it, on how to dive it, which I'm very proud of, which has sold quite well. It's, again, a very niche book for people who want to dive that wreck. It talks about the history of the wreck and what it is, what it was to be in the Navy in that time, and what that ship did, and then how do you dive it? This is for the entry level all the way through to the advanced wreck diver. And so it's so much fun for me, and I've done literally hundreds of dives on it now. And every time, I mean, if you said to me, Steve, you can go for a dive tomorrow, that would be almost my first pick every time. I want to go back there and dive it again. So yeah, I love it. Love it.
Is there any part of the ship you haven't been to yet?
Yeah, there are, and it's only because there's spaces there. There's just not much there. So there's some stores spaces very deep in the ship, which are just going to be a storeroom. I've been to most of them, and then there's a few that are locked off. I'm not sure why, but maybe for safety reasons. So there's a few of those that I haven't been to, but I've been to every space worth seeing. From the steering gear compartment all the way through the lower mess decks where the sailors lived, into all the machinery spaces. The engine room and the boiler room are spectacular. All the machinery is still there. They took the lids off the gearboxes so you can see all the gear wheels. Turbines are still there. There's an upper and lower plates. So upper area, lower area, where we used to climb a ladder to move between. And then the boiler room's very low. The boilers are huge. I mean, if you're in there, it's quite difficult to know what you're looking at. There's just pipes everywhere. And funnily enough, when you first go on the ship I remember going on there as an apprentice, and you go into the machinery spaces and all you see is pipes and machines. It's crazy, and trying to figure out what this is I'm looking at and how does this work. So in the book, I describe the complete plant, how it works from the beginnings of some water in the feed tank to going through the boilers to creating steam, where the steam goes, how it goes into the main engines, how it is then condensed and goes back into a closed cycle, back into the feed system. And so, and I wrote that from memory. I was sitting in Malta when I wrote that book and just wrote, there's only a few things I couldn't remember. I had drawings of the ship and everything. And I had some friends who were admirals by that time. So they basically sent me some general arrangements or drawings of the ship that I could use for my research. But I wrote the book from memory. And it was quite a long time. So 16 to 93 when I left, that's what's that, 13 years later, having not really been involved with it at all, not stepping foot on it. And it was a lot of fun. And then I had to go and dive it and video it and mark where all the holes were. And so I just dived and had a photographer friend take pictures for me. And so an awesome experience.
That's fascinating. Something that popped in my head, and I'm curious if this is a thing or not. But do you ever, when you get to a space like the boiler room, is there ever I don't know, a trinket, a magnet that you put on there for the next person to find, and maybe you kind of trade them off sort of thing? I was just curious. Did you guys do stuff like that? That's the idea of the day.
No, we don't, but I don't see why we couldn't do that. One thing we don't do is we don't take from the ship. So we don't take, it used to be a big thing with wreck diving is to take artifacts and, create your own little museum at home of things that you'd been good enough to dive and recover. We don't do that anymore. We leave things there and we capture everything on video if we're going to do that. So, but that sounds like fun. I should do that.
Well, I was just imagining if you had a magnet that had your information on it, and then, you just have it stuck to one of your tanks, you get to a place, you put it in there, and then the next person could pull and maybe put theirs on. I don't know. That would be, it's almost like a message in a bottle sort of thing, It's
yeah, exactly.
For only the elite few that ever find it. That would be fascinating for me.
What we've got we try to be careful not to encourage people to go there that shouldn't be there is one of the tenets as well.
That's a good point.
That's the only thing. We'd have to keep it in a tight little circle of people who've done the training and have the experience. I've had a couple of gnarly experiences in the Canterbury as well. I got trapped in the back of the boiler room quite a few years ago now, and that was very unfun, and got featured in a book called Close Calls, where similar experience to the cave diving one, where I got entangled in a place I probably shouldn't have gone into with too much equipment on. And it took me about 15 minutes to extract myself from that. This time I was open circuit, so the clock was ticking. But you learn these lessons everyone you walk away from, you come away a bit better. And now that probably wouldn't bother me so much. So it's where are you in your diving journey as well. But yeah, we are pretty careful about ensuring that, if you're going to go to those spaces, don't risk your life. Like, carry the right equipment, do the training, build your skills, go with someone who's been there before and knows it. Or if you don't have that, then lay lines and make sure that you give yourself everything you need to be able to come out safely. It's, there's nothing in any of these caves or wrecks that's worth dying for. So, and that's a big tenet that we try and follow. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Steve, you have been so generous with your time. You so kind to sit here, and I could literally keep asking you questions because you are one of the most fascinating humans I've
thank you. I appreciate it.
And it seems like you are such an interesting mixture of teacher and learner, kind of in combination. And it's so funny. Most of the best, most effective teachers I've ever met like to learn more than they do teach. And it's just that thirst for knowledge, I think. And, and then at some point you just, it feels good to kind of give to others. And so I think it's so amazing. Like, not only are you teaching people all these various things.
You made a really good point earlier that stuck with me too. You mentioned being 40 and what it feels like, and you're still young, but you know some stuff, right? You know some shit now. And
I know enough.
And it's a cool feeling. And I can only tell you, it's only good news when you get to 60, Greg, because now to me, I'm still young. And I know more shit now, and it is this thing of life where, your body deteriorates, but you learn so much. And God, you could never send us back to be 20 again. We'd be too dangerous, wouldn't we? So you just know too much.
Yeah. Well, and I've also got to a point where I just don't care anymore. Like, all the things I was afraid of and like things that would hold me back, I don't give a crap anymore. So it would be dangerous. It would definitely be dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, the lessons in life you get. I mean, the big thing that I'm carrying with me right now is be kind and build people up. There's a couple of tenets I'm really trying to live by at the moment. It's easy to be a ratbag, as we would call them here, so just be kind as much as you possibly can. I mean, there's times when you get tested there, and build people up. There's so much tearing down going on, and just look to your fellow humans and ask yourself, how could they be better and how could you help? I think is a cool thing. And as you say, learning and teaching is part of that. I've made a practice of trying to learn from the very best people in the world that I can. I've had the privilege of training with Ed Sorensen and Patrick Whitman, Tom Steinis. These are luminary names in diving. And I was lucky that I was able to afford to do that. It's cost a lot of money to travel and train with these guys. But when you learn from the best, when you're getting coached by Roger Federer and playing tennis, that's a pretty cool thing. And so, experience what the best have to offer. You can't just go to the best that you can and then try and pass that on and share that with others, I think is a good tenet as well.
Something else that really, I got to get you off here, but something else that really stands out to me is your absolute lack of ego. Like, you are okay saying this person is an expert. I can learn from you, and you know more about me, please, or than I do about this subject matter. Please share with me. And I've met so many people that have such big egos that they can't learn anything no matter where they go. And it seems like you really have
there's a self-awareness there, Greg. There's a self-awareness there, and Clint Eastwood, man's got to know his limitations. Great saying, and it doesn't mean that I'm not good. It doesn't mean that I can't, people can't look at me and say, hey, and people do, I appreciate 100%. That. But am I the best? I don't know. Probably not. Almost certainly not. There's people who do this every day. Are they as good as me? Can they make a coffee like I can make a coffee? Can they do a podcast like, no, they can't. So that's what's special about me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that I have special attributes and and skills and things that I can do that are unique to me. And everybody has that though. And this is what I say about building people up, looking at someone and saying, you're good at this. And I think people need to hear more of that, not what they're
100%.
bad at, but what they're good at.
Yeah, and we're so afraid to tell people that stuff. There's the old saying that tomorrow's not promised. So if there's somebody near you that you care about and they're important to you in some way, tell them. Tell them that you appreciate them. That's so important.
Yeah.
All right, Steve. Right here at the end,
Awesome.
I like to ask my guests, is there anything you would want to promote? I'm assuming you want to talk about your podcast, anything like that. How would you have people connect? How would you have people find you? What's your favorite?
Yeah, you can find me on social media for sure. Facebook, Steve Davis. There's probably a bunch of us, but you'll find me as The Diver. And then Instagram, NZ Steve D. There's a little bit there. I think the thing maybe most is my YouTube channel, Sidemount Pros. So some of the things I've talked about there's video on all of that. Some of it's narrated. So Sidemount as in the diving configuration, Pros, PROS. So yeah, love people to go and have a look and comment or subscribe if they're into that sort of content. The podcast is very specific to side mountain cave diving. There is some super interesting guests and stories in there though. So I mean, if someone wants to have a listen, that's great. That's called Speaking Sidemount. And again, that's available on Spotify and also on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. So yeah, Greg, thanks for the opportunity, man. I appreciate a pro like you having me on, and it's been a good experience. I've enjoyed talking to you.
Okay. I appreciate you. Let me hit stop on all this stuff real quick.